Join me for reflections on the beautiful heavenly writing of the cosmos and our mysterious place within it. You're listening to Michelle's Midheaven podcast, and I'm your host, Michelle Copazier. Greetings, friends of the stars. The prolonged opposition between Mercury and Jupiter and their mutual reception invited me to look more deeply into the impact of language on our understanding of the world. What could the natural relationship between these planets represent, as they are also opposing principles? I'm always fascinated by the fact that ancient Greek philosophers and apparently ancient people in general understood reality in a very different way than we do now. A word used to invoke the real thing. It was the real thing, which for modern people is hard to fully comprehend. Somehow, words got separated from the real thing, and words started being used simply to point to the real thing. The separation is a key moment in the history of humanity. Language transitioned from being a direct invocation of reality to an abstract tool for pointing at reality, which I imagine would have been deemed insane by the ancients. This shift is exactly how we separated ourselves from our environment. You could say that we got separated from our world through mercurial trickery, as Mercury is the god of language. It's the fall of humanity, and this is of course symbolized by the expulsion from the Garden of Eden in the Christian tradition, but this is an idea that appears in many traditions where our primal unity with the cosmos is fractured, resulting in a sense of loss and exile. Astrologically speaking, this fracture, this falling apart, corresponds to the god Mercury, whose signs of Gemini and Virgo usher in the darkness. Gemini, leading up to the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere, actually announces the end of the sun's light building up to its highest point, and the days become shorter after the solstice. Mercury's other sign, Virgo, further breaks down the light and announces the defeat of the sun's light, leading up to the equinox, where darkness triumphs over the light. Esoterically, darkness represents ignorance, as opposed to the light that represents knowledge and gnosis. And Jupiter, as Mercury's counterpart, represents exactly that. Jupiter keeps the promise of the return of the light of gnosis. Gnosis is a Jupiterian unity, in the sense that the knower and the known collapse into oneness. Sagittarius announces the turning point, the return of the light, when the winter solstice lengthens the day, and Pisces ushers in the triumph of the light in the spring. Holding on to the faith that light will return, that we will remember who we are and what this world truly is, that faith is very Jupiterian. So, as opposing forces, Mercury and Jupiter embody a crucial part of the cycle between dark and light. Astronomically, I think we can actually locate the Garden of Eden narrative in the constellation of Taurus, where Adam and Eve existed in an unmediated relationship with the divine and the natural world. Ruled by the goddess of harmony and peace, Venus, Taurus represents the uncorrupted Edenic state, humanity's primal connection to the earth, where life was sustained in balance, security, and simplicity. Taurus perfectly mirrors humanity's unity with the divine in the world before the fall. However, what we see at the edge of the constellation of Taurus is the fixed star Algol, symbolizing the edge of paradise, the transition from the stable, unified garden into the fragmentation and duality represented by Gemini. Adam and Eve's fall begins with an act of mercurial knowing. It's the emergence of Gemini's dualistic thinking and, more importantly, the abstraction of experience, leading to our alienation from God, from each other, and from our environment. I think Algol, with its ties to Medusa, might embody the archetype of the serpent in the garden. The serpent here is a liminal figure, standing between the garden's wholeness and the fractured world of the mind. It is the serpent that introduces humanity to the knowledge of duality, good and evil, light versus dark, on the bridge to Gemini on the other side. Keep in mind here, of course, that Algol appears in the sky like a blinking star, switching from light to dark, or from gnosis to ignorance and back. Algol is very different from the other stars in that respect. And this duality disrupts the unity of the garden, leading to our alienation and exile. Medusa carries the snakes on her head, on her mind, if you will, and if we look at her, we become petrified. To look directly at Medusa is to confront something overwhelming. It's an experience so intense it cannot be endured. That's our existential fear. We face the unbearable separation and become frozen by fear as we're confronted with that which we think is not us, as we're thrown into a world that feels completely alien to us. Eventually, Perseus defeats Medusa not by looking at her directly, not by looking into her eyes, but by using a mirrored shield. And this suggests that the destructive power of her gaze can be transformed through indirect confrontation, or symbolically through reflection and self-awareness. By looking inside, not outside, not into the eyes of Medusa. The mirror implies the need to mediate intense truths with wisdom and caution. Again, in ancient times, especially within oral traditions, words were understood as deeply connected to the reality they described. To name something was to participate in its essence. So if we use Mercury's language to think or talk about something, we actually get to participate in the essence, in the reality of that topic. The principle of logos in the Greek mystical tradition carries the weight of divine order and creation. Words are not labels. Words activate. They call or invoke the deity Mercury himself. It's difficult to describe, but words are Mercury, and Mercury, as a god, shapes reality. Or as some would say, our mind shapes reality. But without Jupiter, the spiritual component, language is robbed from its essential purpose, which is to connect us with meaning, a mercurial task, but one Mercury cannot perform without his opposite archetype represented by Jupiter. On a physical or historical level, the separation probably came around the advent of writing. Cultures before that time had a strong oral tradition relying on memory and the art of storytelling. Through verbal expression, they invoked the gods. Storytelling is much like a ritual that brings something to life. There's an immediate quality to it, as the speaker takes the audience to a specific atmosphere or ambience, or a living conversation opens a door to a shared transcendental experience. Written language, on the other hand, creates a space between the symbol and the thing. It's an imaginary space, and that space gradually became bigger. As if there's another real thing behind the symbol or the appearance that we see or hear. And in that created space lies interpretation, which ultimately removes us, carries us away from the immediate invocation and participation. It becomes a detached mode of thought. In Platonic terms, the written language deals with appearances, while the spoken language connects us to the ideal forms. When language used to be closely tied to our lived embodied experience, it acted as a bridge between us and our environment, and between the seen and the unseen world. And this is precisely Mercury's mission. He's the god of language and the psychopomp, and these two functions are closely connected. I would even argue they are the same. Words not only describe the world, they let us participate in the sacredness of this world. With language gradually becoming more abstract, more instrumental, this bridge is weakened and often even absent, which causes us to perceive ourselves as separate from our environment. Or to say it like Martin Heidegger articulated it so well, we now feel like we are thrown into this strange world. Plato mentioned this, and ironically, he wrote about this. He criticized poets and rhetoricians for dealing in appearances rather than truth, and he warned us about the danger of the written word. And fascinatingly, Plato contributed to the separation with his philosophy about two separate realms, the true forms and their reflections or appearances. This philosophical move effectively distanced human understanding further from a direct embodied experience of reality, and it prioritized abstract concepts over sensory or symbolic participation and lived experience. To me, this brings us very close to the double nature of Mercury. In traditional astrology, Mercury can be diurnal or nocturnal, of the day or of the night. And following a similar dichotomy, Mercury can reveal or conceal higher truths through the way he operates. Heidegger was very much aware of this when he said how modern language tends to stand over the world rather than reveal it. He described a need to recover an older way of thinking and speaking where language lets things be, rather than reducing them to objects of analysis. And we sure did objectify our environment, our planet, and the creatures living in it. I feel this modern modus operandi, this automatic and kind of mad, insane assumption that reality is somehow hidden and that we need to subject everything to analysis to get to some underlying truth is the most obvious symptom of our complete detachment from our environment. It's a clear expression of the fall of humanity. And notice how all this analysis is not really bringing us any closer to any meaningful truths. Instead, the universe is actually coming up with more and more for us to analyze, almost magically feeding our obsession with measuring, calculating, and analyzing things. We don't stop, so the universe isn't going to stop either. It's always going to seem bigger and bigger. There will always be smaller and smaller particles to examine because that's what we're focused on. And the one-sided scientific mind thinks that measuring and analyzing stuff will reveal some hidden truth, something that is more true. However, I think that the act of mercurial measuring and analyzing itself, when it's devoid of Jupiterian counterbalance, that's exactly what is concealing the truth. It makes us blind for the truth that is constantly hitting us in the face. But there is hope. Jupiter, as our beacon of hope and the god of unity, represents the return to the light through his domicile Sagittarius and Pisces. The journey of humanity eventually involves a return to the garden, not in ignorance this time, but with an awakened and enriched consciousness. To me, this return might happen through rediscovering and re-enchanting the world, and thereby cultivating a more holistic, Jupiterian, a more participatory relationship with reality. This re-enchantment of the world is not a simple regression to a pre-linguistic state, to the old Garden of Eden, but rather a synthesis of our journey with a renewed sense of connection to the divine. It's a process that requires us to integrate the Mercurial and Jupiterian aspects of our human experience. In this light, we can see the opposition between Mercury and Jupiter not as a permanent state of conflict, but as a dynamic tension that propels us forward in our understanding of reality. Mercury's ability to divide and analyze, when tempered by Jupiter's faith in ultimate unity, can lead to a new Garden of Eden. The current mutual reception between Mercury and Jupiter is an excellent time to contemplate this, and for us human beings to once again find our place as caretakers of the cosmos. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.